Welcome back to MVM. Today we're doing another First Impressions. This is kind of in lieu of our Gen Con programming. This is another convention game that's coming out later this year that we wanted to kind of play a few times and kind of give our first impressions. We've only played this game. David, you've played it once?
I've played it once. You've played it?
I've played it more. I've played it four times. Twice in digitally on TTS and then twice with the actual real game. And so I definitely have some thoughts, and I want to hear your first impressions as well.
I have some.
So this is kind of, not in lieu of an actual review. I'm probably going to come back and give more detailed thoughts when the game actually releases, because we are playing a prototype copy here. That's important to note.
Pre-production at the very least.
It is. So some of the things that we might have issues with might not even be issues in the final version of the game. So it's important to note that as we talk about our kind of pros and cons and our first impressions. Now, I just want to kind of jump right in and say that this is from the designers of Grand Austria Hotel, which is one of my favorite games of all time. I think just a widely loved game.
Yeah, and you're going to find some similarities here for sure.
You will.
But Grand Austria is widely loved, and one of the things I love about Grand Austria, spoiler alert, it's a little different for this game.
Right.
Is very accessible.
So I thought that's what you were going to start with, because lots of people compare that. Yeah. The theme, for sure. Grand Austria has this super accessible theme of you're running a hotel. You're bringing in guests, you're serving them food, you're putting them in rooms.
And everything makes sense with all of the mechanics. And you know what? We've played plenty of Euros that aren't like that.
Sure.
But it is nice when you play a game and it's like, I can teach Grand Austria to just about anything, not even a Euro enthusiast, and they get it. Because like you just said, closing rooms, serving guests, it all kind of makes sense. Some Euros don't do that. This one, I think, is going to have that hurdle in front of it as well.
Can you tell me the theme of this game in 5 words or less?
I cannot. Well, you are building golems.
That is true.
The mythology here is interesting. This is Prague, right?
Yeah.
And you're building golems, and there's a lot going on, and that's about as well as I can explain it.
Yeah, this is definitely not as accessible of a theme. For those who are like history buffs or like into the mythology or the legend of the golem, like I find it super interesting. There's a lot of really cool details here that are very thematic. The idea, of course, that you're a rabbi in Prague, and this is historical mythology, or however you want to call it, that they brought golems to life to protect the city, but those golems would start to get out of control, and so they had to try to find ways to control them. And that's effectively what's happening here. You're building golems, the golems are running rampant through these different neighborhoods, and you're trying to have your students keep up with the golems as they run through the city.
It's effectively
which is tough.
Representing the keeping control of it, if you will.
Correct.
Right?
You need to be at least where the golem is, or you're paying resources.
And that is fair to say that I think this could be taught if you studied the theme really well as the teacher of the game and kind of each and every step along the way, flavored it with some of that. It's just that a lot of people aren't familiar with that, so it's not as easily understandable.
Yeah, it doesn't help either that this game is not as accessible, which I'm not going to count that as a negative.
No, it's not a negative.
I like heavier games. This is one of the more heavier games from these designers that I've played. There are a lot of rules. There's a lot of different things happening, which I like. That's actually one of my biggest pros for this game, is how many different things are going on.
Oh yeah, I think a Euro lover that loves heavier games might even like this better than Grand Austria, quite frankly. There is a lot going on. When you sit down a new player at this board, and if you can't see this, these are all tiles here.
Yeah,
and
the tiles, the cards up here, the cards over here.
There's a couple more tiles for each of these colors, so you're going to have potentially different sets of tiles. Now, they do come out sort of in the same order, but you're taking some of those tiles out, so there's a lot of variability here. But how many are there here? 10 times 3? Or I guess 7 times 3 or
7 come out, yeah. There's a lot of tiles, a lot of icons.
21 different tiles, which are effectively the powers that you can activate with your golems, and that's just a part of the game.
Correct. and to be honest, this is a bit of a teach.
It is.
And I think we experienced that. I think it was like maybe a 30 or so minute teach when we sat down to teach it. Again, that's just because there's so much going on. So let me break it down in a way that is simple. And this is actually what I love about the game. Because the game is divided into 3 tracks. You have this red track, this yellow track, and that blue track. And those tracks are represented by your player board. You have the blue side of your player board, which represents your study of like magic. You have the red section, which is your golems, your creation and upgrading of golems. And then the right side is your artifacts. You're trying to melt down gold and create artifacts. And so each one of these 3 tracks ties into one of those 3 sections of your player board. And if you go down that track, you're going to have everything you need to do that section of your player board. So I like that because there's never a question of like, how do I do this? Oh, well, just keep going down that red track, send my golems down the red track, take these red track actions, and you're going to be able to make more golems.
Yeah, and this is definitely one of those games where they've compartmentalized the point scoring. Because like what Ryan just covered, that is exactly where you get a lot of your points at the end of the game. You're going to get a lot of points in the blue section by flipping over a lot of these tiles and multiplying them by something. Same thing with this, another multiplication sort of factor, and as it is with the artifacts. So I would almost suggest with that teach, because I think the teach is kind of the big theme here with this game.
Right.
If I were to teach this game, I would probably maybe even back into the teach by explaining that thoroughly. Like, here's how you're scoring points here. Just know that these 3 tracks are going to serve these different areas, but this is exactly what you need. You flip over these and you multiply them by however much knowledge you have.
However many spells you
Oh, that's right,
learn.
by however many spells you have.
So that's one thing about the game. Again, another big pro for me, another thing that I like, at least from the first couple plays, is that each one of these sections of the board has a scoring cap. Because of the way the modifiers work. Over the game, you're collecting menorahs of different colors. You're collecting blue menorahs by upgrading your blue side of your player board. You're collecting red menorahs by upgrading your golem. And you're collecting yellow menorahs by upgrading your artifacts. Now, these upgrades by themselves give you some crazy abilities.
Yes.
The blues make your spells stronger. The reds give your golem all kinds of abilities they can do on the board. And your yellows give you artifacts that generate income for you every single turn. So you're already getting these benefits, but there's a max. Each one can have 8, and the thing that you multiply by is the number of spells you have, which is 4, the number of golems you built, which could be 4, and the number of artifacts you make, which is 4. So each one of these has a cap of you can score 8 menorahs times 4 points.
Yeah,
which is huge.
And that's really cool that you know someone might be going hardcore in one of these areas, but in the back of your mind, you know, well, it's not going to be worth more than X. So
exactly.
You can easily, because in a lot of these games where there's a lot of endgame points, you're like, it's hard to keep track of like, I don't know how many points you're going to have. But now you can kind of look over and say, okay, well, there's 3 areas. He's going to get a lot of points from it. He's getting no points from this. As long as this thing I'm focusing on, I'm getting as many points as he's getting from this section, I'm at least matching him in that respect.
If one player is fully upgraded and put all their spells out, fully upgraded everything on blue, you're like, man, well, they're getting 36 points. Okay. As long as I do the same thing with my golems, I'm also getting 36 points. Now that's a wash. Now we need to try to beat each other in other ways.
Right.
And it's interesting because, again, there is one more menorah out on the board for each of the colors. So as you're moving your student down this track, you're not only getting resources, you're not only controlling your golem, but the first one to go through gets this, and they're actually going to be able to score 1 more multiplier or potentially 4 more points than another person doing that same strategy, which 4 points doesn't seem like a lot, but this game can come down to 4-point difference for sure.
No, absolutely. And speaking of moving down these tracks, one thing that I found very interesting, I'm not sure how I feel about it, because it is something that you have to understand from the very beginning of the game, and it kind of goes against what you'd think, because you're building golems, and the game is called Golem, and the golems are moving down these tracks, but guess what? You kill the golems.
You can kill the golems if they get too far ahead of you.
You have to, though, don't you think?
You really do, because it's impossible to get all of your students, and we'll talk about the actions here in a second because I like the actions, but each one of these students can only get so far. Your golems are going to run out of control, and there's a whole mechanic for killing golems and getting a benefit for doing so. It definitely feels counterintuitive, but that's a huge part of the strategy.
It is. It's something that's difficult to wrap your head around at first, because you think, well, wait, there's an action where I can activate my golems to take that action. If I kill my golem, I'm not going to have any actions on that. Well, you can build more golems, so you kind of want to cycle them. Not to mention, those bonuses at the bottom of the board are not insignificant.
No, they're pretty good. Some of them are straight points.
When we played, you used some of those really to make something else happen for you in a very vital way.
Yeah.
And it was like 2 birds with 1 stone, because you kind of needed to kill the golem anyway, because
Right.
you were going to lose some points or spend some resources that you wouldn't have to normally. And it can be a lot.
Well, and I think that what you're talking about too is like the combo system of the game, which is something that's really interesting because of the way the actions work. You can find a lot of combos. Now, this is kind of like Grand Austria in a way. In Grand Austria, you're rolling dice. Each dice is assigned to a lane. In this game, you're not rolling dice. You're dropping marbles into a synagogue, and the marbles are coming out in one of 5 different lanes. And when you take a marble, the color matters because the color is going to move your colored student. And the number of marbles matter because the number of marbles determines how strong your action is. So that's a little bit like Grand Austria. If you can pull a marble from a place where there's 4 marbles, your action is is 4 strength.
Well, honestly,
and that's how you're going to do everything in the game.
And I would say that's really where the comparison begins and maybe ends.
To a point. I mean, there's definitely some thematic or some mechanical feel. There's the mirror action, which lets you copy another action and things like that.
This whole synagogue and this action board is kind of the Grand Austria thing going on, like Ryan just described. But all of the things that powers is wildly different than Grand Austria, because you have to go here to activate your golems over here, which are going to activate more actions over here, and do a number of other things. There's a point in our game, and this is probably one of the many reasons I lost, was that I kind of decided, you know what, there's not any actions here that I'm feeling I need to take with my golems. The golems weren't in the right position.
Yeah, that's key is positioning.
Yeah, I wasn't managing the golems well enough to get them positioned where I wanted them. So I wasn't really taking those marbles to activate my golems, but there's a lot of other things that you can actually achieve over here with just taking a marble.
I mean, everything you do, again, each one of those actions is tied to a different lane. There's the 3 different resources, clay, coins, and knowledge, which you can gain from those areas. And you can build upgrades, you can buy spells, you can make golems, you can build out your artifacts. All of these things can be done from those actions, and you generally get 3 actions to choose from for every row, and you can do them in any order. So if you need to get your resources first, then you can maybe buy a spell, and when you buy a spell, maybe that triggers something that gives you more resources that lets you then do your upgrade, and maybe when you do your upgrade, something else happens, so you can combo into a combo really easily if you plan ahead. Because I want to talk about the spells personally, because that is one of my favorite aspects of the game, because every one of these spells gives you some kind of one-time lightning bolt effect. You tuck it into one of the columns of your player board, and then you trigger everything that's in that column. So your blue upgrade and any spells that are in there. There is a caveat, once you place a color in a slot, all future spells in that spot have to be the same color, and there's also some restrictions to how many spells you can have in one spot. But it's a really good feeling when you can trigger a spell and just get a whole bunch of stuff, and then immediately use it as part of that same action.
Yeah, and you know that's one of my favorite things in gaming in general. Like, if I lose the game, so be it. But if I can take a turn and do a bunch of things, it feels good. And I'd probably list, at least on my first experience, the spells as my favorite aspect of the game. In fact, so much so that when I play this again, I don't see me ever getting away from that part of the game.
Well, you like that part of the game.
Just because that's what I enjoy. What I need to do is focus on doing a little bit better on one of these other 2 at least.
And that's the thing, is you kind of have to. Because like I said, because of the way that the points max out, you have to do one and a little bit of the other. Or maybe a little bit of both. There's one more thing you can do other than taking marbles, which is using your rabbi to take one of these revolving rabbi actions, which I think are interesting as well, because those are going to change out every round. And only one person can take each of these actions. And these just kind of break the rules of the game. They allow you to take the golem actions of where your golem is without having to spend any resources. They allow you to get spells at discounts, kill your golems, get free upgrades on your board. I mean, they're crazy.
Yeah, they feel a lot like just one-time effects or game-breaking things in the instance. And like Ryan said, they revolve out, so there's a whole stack here of new ones. The other cool thing about this is if you take this top one, that's also going to affect the player order. So if you go there early with your rabbi, you might get first player the next round. But keep in mind, just like Grand Austria, someone else might take one of these marbles here, and now there's fewer actions and powers for you to take over.
And the number of marbles is going to vary based on player count. We just threw all of them in there so you can see what it looks like. And
it would be fewer than this.
It would be fewer than this. There's one more thing too that matters with the color that I think is really neat. You have these 4 characters, 1 character for each round, and these have a pair basically of colors. If you take both those colored marbles, like a red and a yellow, you will get to activate this bonus at the end of the round, which is pretty cool. These cards also tell you how crazy your golems are going to get, how far they're going to run. The higher your power, plus these numbers up here, just dictate how far your golems have to move every turn. Because they are moving. They are always moving forward, unless you kill them, of course.
Yeah, the stronger you make your golem, that's great for certain circumstances, but you just got to know the stronger you make them and the further you go up this track is how far they're going to be running away from you. So you just got to keep that in mind. I think the next time I play, I'll definitely get right into the habit of killing off golems.
Yeah, I mean, do a different strategy every time, right? And that's something that I want to talk about. But before I do, I want to hear your just blanket first impression. After playing this game one time, I want to hear from you kind of how you feel about the game.
So my initial gut impression, after just one experience, for me and the types of people I get to the table, this is probably heavier from those designers, and I would probably err on the side of playing things like Grand Austria. There's a lot of DNA here. Like we said, this is like Grand Austria. When we were talking about the spells, it occurred to me that that feels a little bit more like Lorenzo Il Magnifico in some respects, especially with the way these cards work, where there's a bonus and then this thing going on. So if you're fans of these designers, you're going to like this. But again, for me, based on my first impressions, I feel like I'm going to get those games to the table with the types of people I play with more often than I would this. This is going to intimidate some of the people I play with, for sure. You play with a different crowd,
we
though.
more play heavy games, and so this is kind of right up the alley. And so, yes, I enjoyed it. After four plays, this does not replace Grand Austria for me, but I really like it. Again, the accessibility is one reason. I'll get Grand Austria to the table way more.
Well, plus they just, now
of
you
course,
have
now
all
I've got
those
the expansions
so
and
it can
everything.
be pretty heavy as well.
But I like this game a lot. I mean, there's a lot that it does that I like. I can't say this enough. I love how segmented this player board is, and that you can kind of choose one thing to do. Mm-hmm. Now, there are definitely easier paths to take. Going down the middle and getting all your golems out and upgrading it is definitely the easiest way.
Yeah, I definitely could upgrade the golem pretty easily.
Yeah,
that was happening.
But you're not getting a lot of ancillary points for doing that.
No.
Whereas if you're putting a lot of spells out, it's harder to manage, but you're getting all of those spell bonuses. And if you go to your artifact, which is by far, I think, the hardest thing to manipulate.
I agree.
Because you have to earn this valuable gold, which is really hard to get, and you have to put it in these machines to melt it down. But you can get some amazing income bonuses. You can get to a point where you're getting like 10 victory points every income phase just because you built out your thing. But it's hard to do, right?
Yeah,
So
I feel like these three areas are going to appeal to different types of gamers in a way. Like, if I explain this to people I play with, once I got to this, I feel like I play with some people who'd be like, no, you don't need to tell me anything more about that, because I'm not doing it.
I'm not touching that. Okay. Well, and it's not uncommon to get to the end of the game and have one of these three things get you 0 points.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Like, I don't think I got many. Well, I got a few points
You
from
did
this,
get a
but
few
not
points.
many. I got most of my points.
You might get like 4 points. Okay.
Yeah, by far most of my points from the spells and some of the points from my golem. I have a question for you before we wrap up. Is there anything about this, other than your first impression, whether you like it or not?
Yeah.
Is there anything that felt like was a little bit of a con?
Well, sure. I mean, I definitely have cons with any game. I mean, the teach and all the icons is kind of a con. I mean, it does take a long time.
It's intimidating
to teach. I mean, if you're bringing in new players to this, it's so much easier to say, well, let's just play Grand Austria or Lorenzo again. But I think if you can get over that hurdle of the teach, but then component-wise, I'm honestly not a huge fan of the marbles. I like them thematically. I like what they do. I like that they fit in these little golem spots as
cool.
eyes, and it has a cool table presence. But I don't know how the distribution of these marbles works. We actually had to practice over and over again, dropping the marbles in a right way so that they actually spread out. Because if your table's a little unbalanced, or if you accidentally drop them too far to one side, what you'll have is all the marbles go one way.
It does feel like that's the case. They will distribute to some degree. We did figure it out.
We kind of figured you really need like a cup.
I would say this, again, I don't know that it would be a con, but it would be a warning for sure. This thing, you need to drop the marbles in a particular way. And then it's not really hard to do. You just want to make sure no one's gaming this thing.
That's the thing. Like if you drop them one at a time, you could be like, oh, I'm going to drop 3 on this side, 3 on this side.
And just to let you know, what you want to do is you want to dump them all at once as much as possible right here in the center.
So because they click off each other.
The marbles themselves hit each other to distribute across here. Like, we just dumped these.
Yeah.
We didn't distribute these. Ryan just poured them in there, and they distributed, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, which is pretty solid.
Yeah, but it's a skill to roll them. And I don't know that should be, there shouldn't be a dexterity element to a heavy Euro game where you need to be careful how you roll. I'd even say, like, if all of them come to like 1 or 2, that you should just redistribute the marbles. Because they even say in the rule book, like, they kind of give you that instruction of dumping them in all at once in the middle so that they bounce off each other, they bounce off the walls, and you'll get a more even distribution. Probably even a more even distribution than dice rolling.
Yeah, for sure. That is the interesting thing, because we were asking ourselves, so why couldn't they have just used dice? And the interesting thing about that is, with dice, it's possible that you're going to have them all roll 6s.
Yeah, or any one number.
Like, you could potentially all roll one number, and that is what it is, and no one would question that.
And that happens in Grand Austria sometimes.
It would be odd, but That cannot happen here. First of all, there's just not enough space for all the marbles, and they're bouncing off of each other, so it forces a distribution here that isn't forced in Grand Austria. And I do think that was probably what went into some of their design philosophy. It was a mixture of that and the fact that thematically it was kind of cool with the whole eyeball
for sure.
thing. So yeah, just be warned there that you're going to want to treat this appropriately when you're using it.
Yeah. So of course, like I said, there's a lot about this game that I like. My first impression is positive. This was one of my most anticipated games. I'm not
For 3 years running.
For 3 years, it took a long time, and I think that's part of it. There was so much build-up.
Yeah.
I was not disappointed in the game at all. I don't feel let down, but I also don't think that this is going to jump to the top of my designer, like a list of these designers who are among my favorite designers.
Well, they've killed it on so many games.
Well, and that's the thing is like you're looking at gold. Like how are you comparing any game to Grand Austria Hotel or Lorenzo, which I think are two of the better games ever made, like two of my favorite games.
And with that said, and with what I said earlier about whether or not it appeals to me and the types of groups I get to the table, I do think that fans of these designers who are hungry for a heavier experience and something that's quite a bit more thinky, this is going to be something they want to try out.
Well, and this game is so, like, there's so many pieces to it. There's so many, like, upgrades and combos and,
it's
like,
Euro
the spells.
heaven.
I mean, it is. I mean, you're just triggering things left and right, and you're getting resources, and you're climbing up to like, you can build a spot where you're getting just so much income. It just feels so good. You're just grabbing everything, and you've got just piles of resources by the end of the game because you've got so much income, which I'm really positive about. I'm really positive about the variability, that you're not seeing the same actions every time. You're not getting the same starting setup because you're going to be handing out some random starting cards. And just the fact that you can play your game completely differently. You can completely ignore one part of the game, one game, and then focus entirely on it the next. I think that keeps the game feeling fresh.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing for players to explore because I think oftentimes I think, okay, I'm going to try something new next time, and then I generally don't. This one...
Stay in that comfort zone, David.
Yeah, but I feel because this one kind of lays it right out in front of you, here's your 3 areas, it's easier to go, you know what? I'm going to focus on this. Because right here in front of me, I'm just going to shift my vision from the left to the right, and I'm going to do this time, hardcore.
So yeah, thank you guys so much. Hopefully you have a good idea, I think, of what our pros and cons are. Well, actually, I didn't ask you if you had any like major cons, did I?
I mean,
I talked a little bit about it.
I was right along with you with this, with the marble tower. I just, like I said, not necessarily a con, just something that you want to do correctly when you're playing.
And hundreds of icons. There's a lot of icons.
Well, the overwhelming thing I can't list as a con because a lot of people thrive on that, and I do too.
Well, but whether it's a con for them, it matters if it's a con for you.
For sure.
Is a sea of icons like this going to me? I'm like, ooh, that's juicy, but is it going to turn you away from a game?
A little bit, but not any more than any other heavy game with
well, sure, and I think that's fair. So,
but I also appreciate the fact that there's just so much darn cardboard in this thing. I mean, there's tiles all over the place on your board. There's
and everything,
extra tiles that build your board.
Yeah, you can draft
They're
these.
double-sided.
You'll draft objective cards. You've got these starting resource tiles where you draw 4 and pick 2. There's just a lot. So, thank you so much. Hopefully, by now you know if this is a good
maybe
option
for
you.
Yeah.
I didn't even talk about the solo mode, which you've probably seen off to the side because I haven't played solo yet. I'd like to. Just know that there's love for solo players here. Yep. So this is Golem. The game is coming out later this year. So thank you so much for checking out our first impression. Let us know in the comments below whether you agree with us or not, or whether this game looks like a Grand Austria killer to you.
Or if you have any questions whatsoever.
Yeah, we'll try to answer them as best we can.
Yeah, and until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.
Yeah, bye.
Now, before you go, there's one more thing I want to talk about. I hate to bring this up, but YouTube analytics tells us to do this. So please, click on the subscription button, ring the bell, watch our next video, rinse and repeat. Just keep doing that over and over and over and over.